Hello and welcome back to All You Can Board. I'm Carlo and I'm counting down my top 10 games of 2022. So for those of you who missed the last video on the channel, this is basically part 2 of a 2-part video, which is my 2022 board game tier list. So in the first part, I counted down games number 63 through 11 in a big tier list, tiers F through I got up to tier A. And so this video is going to start off, again, just continuing off of tier A, where I'm going to count down my top 10 games. So yeah, if there's anything in this video that I'm referencing that kind of doesn't make sense or it sounds like, what is he talking about? Chances are it was explained in the last video. I'm not going to get into it. I mentioned a bunch of this stuff at the start of the last video, how these are all 2022 releases from North America, etc., etc. So let's just jump right into it with the 10th game, which for those of you who did watch that video, you'll know I gave these clues, and you know, I'm filming this right after filming the other one, so I haven't seen any of your guesses from that last video. But with the game starting with number 10, the game that I referred to as Exploring Old Maps with Resets Between Rounds, that is of course the Guild of Merchant Explorers. So we covered this in an Own It, Play It, or Skip It video on the channel earlier this year, but as of now it's definitely a top 10 solo game for me, maybe even a top 5 solo game. So this is still in the A tier, of course. Think of, if you're familiar with Kingdom Builder, where you're drawing a card from a deck and it tells you somewhere on the map that you can build on, that's kind of the basic starting premise here, where you get a map, and there's a deck that starts off with just 6 cards, I think it is, and you flip the card and you get to put out these little cubes starting from the center of this map. And unlike Kingdom Builder though, where you might just keep getting the same land type or whatever, you know that you're going to go through this tiny little deck of cards, and every round you're going to be able to get this new kind of ability card. You get a choice of 2, and you're going to get to add it into the deck and use it once, and then in future rounds you're going to keep drawing that. So each round you're going to be adding a new card to the deck, and you know that each of those cards is going to come out once, so you know what you're going to get. You just don't know the order. So you have some idea of where you're going to be able to build, but sometimes you need one card to come up first in order to reach something that you need, and you're basically trying to expand, and there's different ways that different locations on the map can score. And then at the end of every round there's going to be this reset where you wipe and lose all of your cubes that are on the map, other than the ones that you've actually managed to turn into villages. I'll leave it at that in terms of the rules, because I have talked about this on the channel before. I think most of my play, if not all of my plays of this, are going to be solo. It's just a really, really good kind of puzzly experience with a few really, really brilliant design choices, very simple rule set, and it's really tough. Can't recommend it enough if you like those types of games. Again, if you're playing with 2 or more, it's pretty much multiplayer solitaire. But even if you're into that sort of thing, it's really well designed. Highly recommend it. Number 9 is the game that I referred to as Simultaneous Card Play in Under 15 Minutes. So this is still in the A tier. This was a review copy. This is Hot Lead. So this is one that I covered pretty recently in the review of the Criminal Capers trilogy, so I won't get too into it here. But the main reason this cracked the top 10 is something that I referred to in that review. I'm just going to go back and say the exact same thing I said in that review, where I talk about the first experience I had with this game. So from the moment, the very first time I played this, it was a group of 3, I think it was me, Dylan, and Braden. From the moment the game was taken out of my board game bag, we set up the game, I explained the rules, we played the game, and the game was put away. It was a total of start to finish of 12 minutes. I think we maybe spent 9 minutes, 8 minutes playing the actual game, which for me right there is almost unheard of. Like, there's very few games, like we've played Sequoia at some point last year, the year before. That's the other one that comes to mind that's like that short, but Hot Lead is much better than Sequoia. I just can't think of any games really that play this quickly, that are this satisfying, and it's all basically simultaneous play. Everyone gets a hand of 11 cards, and you're going to play 10 rounds. So at the end of the last round, you're still going to have 2 cards to pick from, and then your last card won't get played. And it's sort of like For Sale. Everyone's picking a card, you put it face down, everyone flips over their cards, and then based on the cards that are available in the row, you know, the value of the card you get is going to determine which card you get from there. There's a couple little scoring conditions that come into play in terms of trying to specialize but also diversify. There's a little optional module in the game. It's so quick. It's got some interesting decisions because you've got this hand management where you have a bunch of different numbered cards at the start, and you're just trying to decide which ones to play when, which ones to save for later. And then you can also see what other people have collected, and if they get 4 of the same type, they're going to lose all those cards. So you can also pick something based on anticipating that someone else is going to end up getting a card that they don't want. It's surprisingly thinky for how, again, quick it plays, how easy it is to teach. it's just an achievement in game design for a game to be that satisfying and play in like literally 10 to 12 minutes kind of thing. Like it's, yeah, not many games out there like this, so that's what earns it its spot. I'll say right now, if this game took even 20, 25 minutes, something like that, it'd probably be like maybe my 20th best game of the year or 25th or something. Like it's, the fact that it plays that quickly is really what sets it apart. So that's Hot Lead, of course, from the good Dr. Reiner Knizia. And if you're keeping track based on the last video, I think this is my number 2 ranked Knizia game of the year of the 8 that I played. Of course, not counting Ra, which I mentioned is a reprint, and is not eligible for this. All right, number 8 game was the one that I referred to as betting and jostling for position on dry erase boards. And that is, again, still in the A tier, Long Shot the Dice Game. A really impressive little game and one of the best roll and writes I've played now. And one of the most interactive. So it's basically a horse race around a little track. You put out this board. So you set out these horses and everyone has their own little sheet. And then you're basically going around the table taking turns rolling these 2 dice. One is an 8-sided die that determines which of the 8 horses is going to move. And then the 6-sided die has 2 1s, 3 2s, and a 3. So the combination is going to tell you which horse is moving and how many spaces it moves. And then you're going to look at the top and see the horses out there. And some horses, or most horses, when they move, will also make, you know, other horses move either 1 or 2, or just 1 spot. So there's different odds, like the number 1 is the most likely to win, the number 8 is the least likely, and so on. But you're basically kind of going along. You start with, I think it's $12 each, and you're going to be spending your money throughout the race. You can buy any of the horses to actually keep them in your possession, and then that way the horses that finish the race first, second, and third place will get you a varying amount of points. You can spend your money making bets on horses. You can do all kinds of stuff. And there's a point in the race where you can no longer make bets once they kind of cross this no bet line, and you're going to get points at the end for, like, you know, if you bet on horses that did well based on the odds, whether they were kind of like a long shot or they were front runners kind of thing. And you're also able to kind of like, you have a lot of freedom with the dice. Like, it is a dice game, but you have a lot of freedom because you also have these 3 wild spots. And when you roll the common die that determines which action everyone can take, you don't have to do the same thing. Like, there's 5 or 6 different actions, and you can even use it to cross off these little concessions on your sheet that basically will give you bonuses. And there's a whole different bunch of bonuses you can get. You can either get yourself more money so that you can make more bets or buy another horse or whatnot. You can just boost one of the horses that you own or have bet on further ahead in the race, or you can hold other horses back. There's all kinds of stuff you can do so that even when your plan isn't going, your strategy isn't going according to plan, you have a way of kind of getting back in the game. There can be some exciting comebacks and fun stuff. It's just a really, really good game. And again, one of the most interactive roll and writes I've played. But yeah, this is a really fantastic game that caught me off guard. And I think if you like sort of roll and write games, or if you're looking, or even if roll and write games haven't quite done it for you, but you're looking for one that is interactive, that's going to be easy to teach and get people around the table kind of shouting, betting on horses, you feel engaged the whole time. It's just a really, really fun game. Yeah, that's Long Shot the Dice Game. All right, number 7, still in the A tier here, and this is the one that the clue I gave in the last video was deck management simulation with a deceptive amount of control. So this is Challengers. This is a game that I think has been, sort of unfairly written off. Like, it seems very divisive. People who kind of, I don't want to say get it, because I don't want that to come across as condescending to people who don't like it. You're entitled to not like a game just out of not liking it. But if you think that this game is like pure luck, or I've heard a lot of people say that it's like 95% luck, or the game is pure randomness or whatever, and I think it's fair for me to just say that you're wrong if that's what you think about the game. For those who don't know, it's basically, you know, the old card game War, where you're just flipping cards and then seeing who, you know, gets the highest values and who wins. There's an element of that for sure, but you're basically building this deck throughout this tournament. You play, I think it's 7 rounds, but you're basically in between rounds, you get to tweak your deck a little bit. So you're going to be able to add either 1 or 2 cards every round. You start with this, everyone starts with the same deck of, I think it's like 8 or 10 basic cards. I think it's 8. And you're going to have these choices of which decks are you going into to add either 1 or 2 cards, but you get offered a certain amount of cards, and you can either pick 0 or 1 or potentially 2 depending what is being offered to you that round. But you don't have to take them, and you can kind of do a refresh where you get rid of those and then give yourself another set of options to pick from. And then once per round, and this to me is what makes the game, okay? The next thing I'm about to tell you is you can remove as many cards as you want from your deck. You can remove 0, you can remove 1, you can remove 7 cards from your deck. You can do whatever the heck you want, and that's the biggest choice, that's the most freedom you have and the most control you have over your deck throughout this game. And you're basically playing this tournament, this series of games, and at the end, whoever has the most points throughout the tournament wins. So everyone's decks are evolving throughout, but it's that decision of removing cards, because sometimes it makes sense to remove the card that you just added the game before, and you're like, but this is a strength 5, it's maybe the highest number. Can I really, it helped me last game, I just won, but now I'm realizing that maybe my deck will be more efficient if I get rid of it, and I don't know, it's these really tough decisions, but they're kind of hard to notice at first. I think the game is, again, it's deceptive because once the match starts, most of the game is out of your control. Some of the cards that will come up will give you the odd decision here or there, but for the most part, you're flipping cards and seeing what happens. I won't get too much more into the rules. There's a couple little things like with the bench where your cards go, and you want to have duplicate cards because then they all stack up in the same spot rather than filling out more spots on your bench, and you don't want your bench to get full. On the surface, I wasn't expecting much, and with each subsequent play, I've kind of realized a new thing about it and been like, oh, I never really considered that aspect. And I was losing a lot at first, and typically, even if I feel like a game has a lot of randomness, if I'm losing a lot, I have to accept that I am not good at the game. It's not just, you can't just be unlucky and lose every single time. There's that's such an extreme way of looking at it, and such an oddball, unlikely thing to happen. So I asked myself, why am I losing all these matches? And I started thinking about the game in different ways and trying to think a bit more about the control that the game does give you. And it sort of reminds me a little bit of coaching a sport, where you can plan, you can make your, train your players and do whatever you want, but once the game starts, you're kind of on the sidelines watching, and you can maybe make these little tactical adjustments along the way, right? The cards come up, you might have some decisions, but for the most part, it's a simulation. It's those auto battler video games, but in tabletop form. And yeah, I'm loving Challengers so far. We have a copy in our AYCB collection now that we got recently. Can't wait to play this with Dylan and Braden and show this to some other people, and get maybe a couple of big tournaments going and seeing what other people like. It's not going to be a game for everyone, but Challengers has really impressed me, and I'm looking forward to playing a whole bunch more of it. And I'm going to be definitely checking out Challengers 2 Beach Cup when I get a chance as well. So yeah, this is one of my biggest surprises of the year, no doubt. All right. Number 6 is the game, still in the A tier here, that I referred to as Customizing Your Odds in Anticipation of Winter and Attacks. So this is Dice Realms. This is a very conflicting game for me because, Tom Lehman designed one of my absolute favorite games of all time, Race for the Galaxy, which I've played so many, including digital plays, I've played over 1,000 times by now. Every player starts with 2 basic dice, and the game comes with, I don't know how many hundreds of different die faces, I can't remember exactly, but it's sort of a Dominion style thing where you draw these random tiles from a bag instead of making a card market in Dominion of 10 cards. In this, you're drawing these 5 tiles from the bag, and they're going to tell you which die faces are available in the game, and throughout the game you're basically rolling dice, you get some money, you get some grain, that kind of thing, and you're upgrading your dice, so you have these little tools that you'll pop off the face of a die and you'll stick on another one, so you're customizing your dice throughout the game. You can also buy new dice. So there's different ways you can go. The game gives you a lot of freedom, even though, again, it's basically you're at the mercy of your dice rolls to an extent, but because you're able to craft them, you can decide, do I want to push and get, my 3rd dice or my 4th dice early so that I have more dice to roll, or do I instead want to just focus on upgrading these 2 dice? You can get rerolls to be able to reroll them more. You can get these set of die tokens where, let's say you have a die that has all the five basic faces on it, but you've upgraded one of those to something really powerful, then maybe these set of die face tokens are going to be valuable. They're expensive, but if you know that you really want that one result, you can just do that and keep setting that die face and kind of milking that one thing. There's a fate die that gets rolled every round at the start that affects all the players at the table. So based on which combination of tiles are in play, what the other players are doing, and the game end trigger can be one of a number of things, either grain running out, victory point tokens running out. So there's different ways that the game can end, and you kind of always have to be reacting to what the other players are doing, and depending on the game state, you might want to either rush the game, or you might want to slow things down and try to catch up. I think it's a game that's going to take me, I've probably played about 7 or 8 times now. I'm going to need to play it a lot more to see where it ultimately lands. There was a time earlier in the year where I thought this might be my number 2 or 3 of the year. There were other times where I thought, is it even top 10? But I feel like it's going to be one of those games like Dominion where it takes a bit of time to kind of figure out the best strategies. I can see this getting, if it does well, I know it's a big box, a very expensive game, but if it does well, I could see this getting a lot of expansions going down in the future, and it could give it a lot of kind of like longevity and replay value. So it's a game that I find is very interesting, and there's not a lot out there like it, especially like the dice customization aspect. But it's not going to be for everyone. And again, it's also not a very affordable game. It's very, very expensive, especially for something that plays that quickly. But if you like the system, then the replay value, I think, is definitely going to be there, even just in the base box with the tiles that come with it. So yeah, that is Dice Realms from Tom Lehman. Okay, now we're into the top 5. We're still in the A tier here, not quite good enough to get into the S tier yet. So this one I referred to, the clue I gave was team versus team battles with 0 luck. So that is Guards of Atlantis 2. Never played the original Guards of Atlantis, and I definitely need to play number 2 a lot more to see where it would land. There were times where I thought this might be my number 1 or 2 of the year. It's a game that I have to be in a certain mood for. Like, I don't play a lot of team versus team games. It's one of those games where some of your turns nothing is going to, or not nothing is going to happen, but you're going to try something, and sometimes it's going to take turn after turn after turn to actually like execute on something that you tried doing. A lot of it is set up and jostling for position and trying to sort of, you know, you have to know your own characters as well as the other team's characters. It's kind of like one of those MOBA style video games. My favorite one in the past I used to play was Heroes of the Storm, but you're basically trying to get to the other person's, the other team's base and kind of destroy their main base. Or you can kind of push the lanes with these minions to kind of put pressure. Anyways, don't really go too much into the rules, but there's a ton of different characters, and the game is very sort of like pared down. Like these types of games, like I'd previously played, like Cloudspire, for example, these types of games are usually way heavier on the rules, a lot harder to kind of like actually fully grasp. And I'm so impressed by how well designed this game is. You have a hand of 5 cards, each of them is a different color, and you're basically going to play 4 rounds before the reset. So you might play your red card, and then that stays in front of you, and then the next round you might play your green card, or whatever. Once you've played 4 of your 5, everyone's going to pick their cards back up and kind of refresh their hand. As you know, kill minions on the battlefield and do other things, you're going to level up, and you can start upgrading your cards. So now you take a more powerful red card, or you whatever. When you get to a certain level, you get an ultimate card, which is like a purple one, and you always have choices. So you have choices of how you're going to build your character. Are you going to build based on how you like to play that character specifically? Are you going to try and synergize with your teammates? It's a game that I wish had come out when I was like, you know, in high school or in my early 20s when I had more time to play games, because I could have seen myself playing this all the time with my friends. These days, it's not exactly what I'm looking for in like the ideal game night, and that's why it's, again, only at number 5. The other games above it are kind of more my jam, typically, I'd say. But yeah, Guards of Atlantis 2 is an incredible design. I can't imagine this style of game being designed any better than this. So yeah, that's Guards of Atlantis 2. Number 4 on the list, still in the A tier here, is, so the clue I gave was traveling across Europe and avoiding using opponents' routes. So this is Free Ride by Friedemann Friese, who is just continuing to climb up the ranks of my favorite designers, always designing interesting games. This is kind of a little bit like Ticket to Ride. You have a map of Europe, and the game basically has kind of 3 phases. There's like a prologue phase at the start where you kind of determine in which city everyone's train is going to start and where everyone's initial destination is. Then there's like the main game, which is, 80 to 90% of the game. And then there's the end game, epilogue, whatever it's called, where basically the end game condition sort of is triggered, and certain players can be out, and once you've passed and you're kind of done, then every time it comes around to you, you just collect a coin, which is going to be worth 3 points, and the other players can keep going. So if you think you can get more than 3 points per turn, you might want to keep taking turns to kind of fulfill your routes and fulfill objectives. But if you think I'm not going to be able to do that much and the other players are, then you can just go out and keep collecting basically 3 points per turn. There's going to be a market of these kind of cards. It plays over 3 rounds, and there's a card in each deck. Deck 1, 2, and 3 have 1 card each for every city in play. And these cards are going to be laid out in such a way that they have 3 cards in a row. And when you acquire a new route, you're either taking the top card and middle card of a column, or you're taking the middle card and the bottom card. If you take the top and middle, you're basically saying that you're going from that first city to the second city, Or if you take the second and the third card, you're basically saying that you're going from the second city to the third city. So you're carrying passengers on your train, and once you reach that city, you basically cash in those cards, you flip them over, and those are now banked points for the end of the game. And as you pass through cities, as long as that city is one of the ones out there available, you can pick up that card as a new route to kind of like start a new destination. And as the rounds go on, you kind of upgrade your capabilities. So when the kind of second round triggers, you get a second car, so now you can hold 2 destinations, whereas early on you can only hold 1. And when you get into the third round, now your train can move up to 3 spots instead of 2. As you build routes, you're marking them as your own, and traveling across your own routes is free. But as soon as you travel across someone else's route, which you can do, as soon as you do that, you basically pay them a coin, which is again worth 3 points, so you're losing 3 and they're gaining 3, so it's a 6-point swing between those 2 players. But then that route no longer becomes, or it belongs to them. It is now a state-owned line for the rest of the game. So for the rest of the game, no one's going to profit off it. It doesn't belong to anyone anymore. So you're kind of setting up these routes to get these one-time payouts. You're trying to get in other people's way, see where other people are going, and branch out across the map in a certain way that you're, again, getting in people's way, trying to get them to use your routes, and you're really trying to avoid taking theirs. The game is just filled with tough decisions. It's like a 4-page rule set. It's super easy to get into. I have a couple minor issues with it, like the way the board looks is kind of hard sometimes to tell if let's say if your sense of European geography isn't very good. It might be hard to spot things, just like the board looks all kind of one color, and it's kind of hard to spot a city if you don't know, again, geographically where it is. But the decisions are exactly what I look for in games. Tough decisions right from turn 1. I love that. So yeah, highly recommend you check out Free Ride. Plays in anywhere from like an hour to an hour and a half, I'd say. I've played it with 3 and 4 players so far. It worked really well at both counts. I'd say best at 4. We'll see how it plays with 5. We'll definitely review this on the channel once we've played it more. All right, into the top 3. Number 3 here, this one almost made it into the S tier, but not quite. We're still in the A tier. Number 3 is the game that I refer to as real-time worker placement that reminds me of Warcraft 3 for PC. So this is Time of Empires. So this is a real-time worker placement game with sand timers. The sand timers are 30 seconds each, and those are your workers. You get 2 of them. When you take an action, either on your own player board or in some of these kind of common areas, you basically flip the timer over so that the 30 seconds starts ticking, and you can only move that timer once all the sand is depleted, and then you can take that worker and put it somewhere else. The game plays over 3 rounds, and each round is timed on a 9-minute timer. So, and you have this app that you can get that assists it. It's got some really kind of like rousing, kind of like battle music that's like really kind of triumphant and epic. It really gets you in the mood for the game, and you are doing all kinds of stuff. The reason why I said it reminds me of Warcraft is because you're kind of like building up an army, exploring this map. You can kind of fight over different objectives. You can kind of try to get area majorities for these like wonders, and you can also recruit leaders. But it's because you have all of these sort of things competing for your attention, you can't do everything at once, and you might be trying to focus on something else, and then someone's like, okay, yeah, I just destroyed your building over here, I defeated you in battle, and you're like, wait, what's going on over there? Oh, hang on a sec. And it's kind of like you've got all these kind of things happening at once, and your attention is being diverted, and if you're focusing too much on battles or whatever, and your workers, like once the sand timer runs out, if you're not taking another action right away, you're losing out on your action efficiency. So you have to be watching your sand timers, ideally trying to stagger them a little bit so you can take one action and then look around and plan and take another one, and then while they're just ticking, you can't do anything other than just kind of look around at what you have on your own player board, what the other players have on their boards, what's going on the main map where you're kind of fighting over territories, and at the end of every round there's kind of like a little reset phase and a scoring phase that happens. Your first learning game is going to feel pretty chaotic, and you might want to do the kind of like non-timed round for the very first round that you ever play. This is one of the most unique games I've probably ever played. I've never played something like this before. You have different things you can do with your workers. They can be kind of like, you have these pieces that can basically be scholars, which are used to compete for majority for things like the wonders and the leaders and all that kind of thing. Or you can use them to be placed on the board to be your kind of units that you're going to battle with. Similar to Dice Realms, which I mentioned a few games ago, this is pretty expensive. I think this game's like $100, so Probably a try before you buy, if you have a way of trying it. But man, what a cool game. And this is, I wish more designers and publishers took risks like this, because this is an ambitious game. It's very bold. If you have a lot of analysis paralysis, or you like to be fully in control, you might not like this. But if you can kind of embrace the fact that it's all about just having the fun, rolling with the punches, kind of acting on your intuition and stuff, like, I think you'll love this game. I certainly do, and I can't wait to play it a lot more. All right, into the top 2 now. Finally, we're in the S tier. The number 2 game is what finally cracks the S tier. These are the only 2 games. And again, the S tier was, what was it? By the BGG ratings is excellent, always want to play. And again, both of these have the potential to eventually climb up to a 10 one day in the future, but it's going to take at least a couple of years. We'll see. Number 2 is Mille Fiori, designed by Reiner Knizia. This is a game that, when we did our most anticipated games of the year, I know Dylan had this pretty high up. I didn't even have it in my top 10. To me, it looked more like it was going to be a Stefan Feld point salad style game. This one was called Colorful and Combo-tastic Knizia was the clue I gave. What a game this is. It's basically a common board that's divided into 4 quadrants, if I remember correctly. And on your turn, you're going to be selecting an action card that is going to tell you basically where on the board you can go with your tiles. And it's sort of like laying tiles down. These 4 quadrants all work differently. They all score differently. Some of them are like immediate points. Other ones are kind of setting you up or any other player up to build off of them to trigger other points. They all work in different ways. But the way that you get these cards and the way that you kind of cover up symbols that let you maybe take another action card, you can get these big combos that feel a little bit like when you're playing a roll and write game. And there's this other smart little thing at the bottom. There's this kind of like ship track, these little boats, and some of the cards have these boats on them, or some of the things you cover up might let you get a boat movement. And your track only has a certain number of spaces, so if you get to the end of your boat track, let's say halfway through the game, then you're kind of limiting yourself on being able to take those actions again, because they're not going to do anything for you. But it's all about kind of, it's way more interactive than I expected. And even though the theme is like totally like nonsense, like it's basically an abstract game, and it doesn't feel like really a Reiner Knizia game until you start playing it and kind of realizing the way that like the simple rules lead to these excruciating decisions, really interesting trade-offs. Nowhere near as good with 2 players. Definitely play this with 3 or 4. That is where it shines. I think 4 players especially. I don't have a copy of this, Dylan does, but this is a game I will probably have to buy for my own collection one day. It's fantastic. I hope to play this many, many, many more times. That is Mille Fiori. And now on to my number 1 game. Again, obviously still in the S tier. When I played this, I think I knew right away. I questioned it a little bit, I guess, just because of how light the rules are and everything, but I think I knew deep down that this was the number 1 game of the year for me. Root building in a cartoonish kingdom. This is Caesar's Empire. This game basically represents like everything that I look for in game design, what I'm in the hobby for, and like the types of games that I'm seeking out to add to my collection to keep playing, which is the ratio of complexity of decisions versus the simplicity of the rule set is so hard to find games like this these days. Like it's really a triumph of game design. Mathieu Potvin, where have you been all my life? Why aren't you designing more games? Please design more games. This game is amazing. It's got a map of Europe. Rome is right in the middle. Every turn matters. Every turn from the very beginning is just an excruciating decision. Not excruciating, it's not punishing. In fact, the game is always giving you something, because all you're doing on your turn is you're picking one of the cities that is not yet connected to Rome, and you're going to place your little road tokens on it and connect it back to Rome. Sounds pretty straightforward. When you connect that city, every city is going to have a combination of 2 different types of tiles. There's going to be like a region tile, I think it's called, which is going to just score you a certain number of points at the end of the game. Potentially, not guaranteed. If you have too many of the same region or multiples, then only the highest one scores. But those are also each going to have, randomly distributed at the beginning of the game, you're going to have these treasures that are on these. So you're going to take a region tile with a treasure token on top, and you're going to have your little player board where you have this kind of set collection thing going on, where if you specialize in a resource up to a maximum of 4 resources, your first one's worth 0, then 2, then 10, and then 20. So once you have, your second resource, you really want to get that third of the same kind and that fourth. You can get a maximum of 4 because there are only 4 on the map. So as soon as you have 2 or 3, everyone is probably looking at your board thinking, I can't let that person get that 4th, wine or olives or whatever it is, or wood. But you also have this part of your board where you score for diversifying. There's 8 different types of treasures, and if you get all 8, I think it gives you like 46 points. And even if you just get 5 or 6 or 7, it's a lot of points. And then there's also these gold tokens, which score also kind of like an exponential way, a little bit differently. But when you pick those up, they're also going to double the points you get on that turn, because you're scoring for every single road piece that is in that route that leads back to Rome. If you connect it in such a way that there's 2 routes that lead back, then you have to pick the shortest one and score for that one. If 2 are equal length, then you get to pick which one to score. But the interesting thing, or one of the interesting things about this game, is that any players that have contributed to that route are going to score. So you might have 2, 3, 4 players all in that route, and each player is going to score a point for every single piece that they have in that route. So there's this really interesting thing. The game is all about trade-offs. Again, do I want to specialize in resources or diversify? Do I want to create my own routes to just keep scoring big points on my turn? Or do I want to keep getting in other people's ways and anticipating where they're going so that I'm scoring tons of passive points when it's not even my turn? There's so many different ways to kind of play. Every turn is a new kind of puzzle or reanalysis of the game state of the board. Can I afford to take one of my precious turns? I have so few turns. Can I afford to spend this one turn getting in that person's way or getting in that route or trying to short circuit them so that instead of taking this 10-point route, now they have to take the short way and only get 4 points, and I'm also going to get one of those? What's the trade-off there? Is it worth it? But if I do that, then I can't get that 3rd resource of that type that I needed. But I haven't got to that region yet, and there's a 6-point token there, and it's like everything you want to do is like you're ignoring other things that you also want to do. It's like there's so many things that are tempting you and you really can't do it all, but it's so interactive, such a simple rule set. If you wrote this off because of the cartoonish artwork or because you looked at the weight on BGG and you thought, oh, this seems too light, I think this is a game that can be played with basically anyone of any age and experience level. But I think advanced gamers, people who've played a lot of games and who are looking for something that, again, plays so quickly. It's like a 30 to 40 minute game usually, but it's so good. It's, again, some of the toughest decisions you'll have that the rules just make sense right away, and you just have to look at the board and figure out what the heck you're going to do and what's the best way. And the last thing I'll say is the games I've played, it's been so interesting to see the way the scoring plays out, because the players who leap ahead in scoring near the end, you usually see that as the game goes on, the other players catch up. And I think the first time I played, one of the players was dead last by a huge margin. We kept thinking like, oh, this is going well for them. And then suddenly their end game scoring, because they got one of every resource, I think they got those 46 points, they just jumped up, and I think they got 2nd place and they almost won the game. And everyone was like, whoa, I didn't realize that was kind of like a viable strategy. So there's different ways to win, and the who's going to win the game is always unpredictable right up until the end. So anyways, again, that is Caesar's Empire. Mathieu Potvin, design some more games, please. But yeah, those are my top 10 games of 2022. So again, only 2 games made it into my S tier. For anyone who's curious and didn't see the last video, you can go back and check that out if you want to hear about kind of how these measure up against the rest of the games that I played from 2022. Otherwise, that is it for me. I feel like I've lost my voice from filming both these videos back to back, so I apologize for that if you were unable to hear me as well. But thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of these games if you've played them, or are there any here that you have not played or hadn't heard of that you're now interested in? Yeah, always curious to hear your thoughts. Feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you like this, join our Discord, you can support us on Patreon, all that good stuff. Check the description below for more info. Otherwise, that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you again soon. Top 50 games of all time, 2023 edition coming up soon.